Runes are by far the most important thing in Summoner's War. In fact, if I were in charge, I would call the game Ruiner's War, which is probably reason enough for me not to be in charge. But moving on, runes can be equipped onto your monsters to give bonus stats and set effects. And each rune you find is going to be assigned a number between 1 and 6 corresponding to the different slots on the rune hexagram. But just what is a rune set? A rune set is activated after equipping the required number of runes of that type onto a single monster. And they can be either what's called a main set and require 4 runes of a similar type, meaning Violent, Fatal, or Swift as examples, or they can be what's called an offset and only require 2. That would be like Shield, Will, or Revenge. And yes, those effects can stack if you decide to equip more than one offset. You can find runes while going through the scenario, but the good stuff is going to be in Kairos. So you want to jump into Giants and start farming up a nice foundation of Swift and Fatal runes to start off your progression into Summoner's War. I should probably make a full video on this, but speed not only dictates turn order, it also loosely translates to more turns. That's why it's so important to have access to more than one good Swift set on your account starting out. So aim for Giants B10 and then go to B12 when you're ready. And if you want more details on how to find the rune sets that you're looking for, check the drop info tab before you decide on the stage. Speaking of stats, the main stat of each rune is going to vary based on the slot that it is. So for instance, slot 1 is always going to be flat attack, slot 3 will always be flat defense, and slot 5 will always be flat HP. The 2, 4, and 6 slots differ from that because they can also feature percentages, and you're going to want to use those in most situations. Something important to note though is that speed is the only stat that will never appear as a percentage on a single rune, and it is a very important stat. So to summarize all that real quick, slots 1, 3, and 5 will always have a main stat that is flat, and 2, 4, and 6 can feature percentage stats as well. Now on to substats. Substats are going to be what make or break a rune for you, and they are applied at power-up levels 3, 6, 9, and 12. If you're rolling a rune that is lower in rarity, then at each of those intervals, it's going to try to add a substat from a pool of stats that is excluding the main stat. So, for instance, if you're upgrading a defense percent rune, you're not going to roll into defense percent in a substat. There are no dupes allowed in there. But if you're rolling, say, a legendary rune that already has 4 substats beneath it, instead of adding a new one, it's just going to power up one of the substats that's already there, leading for some potentially awesome results if it rolls into 1 or 2 of those substats. Lastly, runes can be powered up all the way to plus 15, and that last power-up level is going to give a 20% boost to the main stat, which is tremendous. I know that's already a lot, but I want to cover one more thing before I get going, and that's artifacts. Artifacts can also be found within the Kairos dungeons, inside the Steel Fortress and the Punisher's Crypt. Unlike runes, however, their sub-properties directly affect the abilities of your monsters. So you can find something that gives bonus crit damage on skill 1, or maybe it increases your monster's defense as their HP decreases, or you could even find one that increases the amount of life drain you get from vampiric effects. Each monster can have 2 artifacts equipped onto them at any given time, one for their attribute or element and another for their type. And something important to note too is that the main stat will always be the same lump sum of either flat HP, attack, or defense regardless of rarity. And that is why it is so important that you jump into whatever floor you can do right away and farm up enough artifacts to put on your monsters. Because having that extra main stat, again, that flat HP, attack, or defense, could mean the difference between a success or a failed run. For more examples on how to properly find the artifacts that you need for your monsters, I'd actually recommend that you check out the Monster Lab series on the channel as well, because Mav goes into detail about what artifacts are good for each monster in each episode. And that about covers it for the Beginner's Guide to Runes and Artifacts. I know that was a lot of information. If you need clarification on anything or have any personalized questions about your progression, you should come watch our streams. We stream Wednesdays and Fridays right here on YouTube or on our Twitch channel.